Hi all, I wanted to go over a few of the topics regarding this week's ratings. As I mentioned in the previous video, this course is going to go over or review both qualitative and quantitative research approaches. In particular, the course is going to review how to analyze data for both. In the past, when you've had me for courses, we talked about research methodology in more broader terms. But for this course, we're going to dig down into the nitty-gritty and look at not only the methodology, but how to analyze data. This should be very helpful to you as you move forward with your data collection and data analysis for your dissertations. The books that were selected for this course are books that you can use as you prepare for your chapters 3 and 4 in terms of writing them, as well as in terms of preparing for those aspects of your dissertation. These books are also helpful to you as practitioners. So as you move forward in your careers, you'll be able to utilize these texts to help you analyze any data that you may use for work purposes. And with that, I will tell you, it was a hard decision to make in terms of selecting these texts because any type of research textbooks can be expensive. And so I was very purposeful in what I selected and what I thought would be useful to you in your day-to-day work. So I do want to go over a few points with regards to the readings for this week. I just wanted to go over a few of the high points with regards to the Criswell text for chapters 1 and 2. And I wanted to do this especially for the qualitative portion of the course because I was able to find some really great videos for the quantitative portion of the class, both in utilizing Andy Field and a few other individuals that had done a really great job in terms of putting videos out with regards to various aspects of statistical analysis. But outside of Criswell's, I think he has 4 or 5 videos on his SagePub website. There aren't any other videos that I thought would be as helpful in terms of tying to the text. So I have decided to do a few videos just for the Criswell book. Bear with me as I do this from week to week. I'll try to make sure to have them up for you all at least by Wednesday or Thursday of the week that you have readings, just kind of help you along in terms of understanding the text. So I'm going to get started. So with the first chapter of the book, the main point of the book is to overview the 5 primarily used qualitative research methodologies and analyses. And so the book begins with more of a historical overview of the use of qualitative research and how it has evolved over time. And the purpose of the book is to examine the 5 different qualitative inquiry approaches: narrative, phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, and case studies. So of these 5, most students utilized grounded theory, ethnography, and case studies. I know that I know that Cam really is beginning to focus more on narrative inquiry and more on narrative work. And Dr. Hutchinson is also focusing on that as well with her students in terms of doing a self-study. And so we're going to delve a lot into narrative, which is why I'm glad that that's the first topic covered in the text as well. And so the book also helps to define qualitative research and presents references in terms of learning more about the 5 approaches that are presented in the text. And so why did I select the book? Well, the book outlines the 5 approaches that I mentioned earlier: narrative, phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, and case studies. And so not only does it outline each, but it also examines the 5 approaches. And it also provides a side-by-side kind of inquiry in order to see the differences between the 5 approaches, or among the 5 approaches rather. Which is good because I think oftentimes students will get confused. I know that when I was a doctoral student, I was also confused about what's the difference between ethnography and phenomenology. What is grounded theory? And so students oftentimes can get confused. But these 5 approaches are 5 amongst many approaches, but these 5 are just the most popular that are used. And the approaches differ throughout the process of research. So whether that's looking at the introduction to a study, the purpose of the research, and research questions, data collection, data analysis, and the writing of the report. Each aspect of the research for each one of these types of qualitative research is different. And the standards of validation and evaluation, which is hugely important because we talk about everything else, but we really don't get into the standards of validation. We talk about validation a lot in terms of quantitative research, and what I mean by that is validity and reliability, but we don't really talk about that in terms of qualitative research. And so the great thing about Creswell is that he goes into all of that. As a matter of fact, he's the father of introducing validation into qualitative research. And with his co-author Poth, they've done a great job with this text. So what's also important is the positioning of ourselves with regards to qualitative research. What's really interesting about the authors of the text, Creswell and Poth, is that they both were originally quantitative researchers, and they're very strong quantitative researchers, somewhat renowned in quantitative research, but also became passionate about qualitative research. And so that's what they are primarily known for. Creswell is also known for mixed methodology, which makes sense because he's also very strong in quantitative. And so what's also important is that they were interested in the composition of qualitative research and formats for how research and evaluation can be communicated. So there's a very kind of standard and rigid way in which quantitative research is communicated. And with qualitative research, there's such a variety of ways in which you can communicate not only the purpose of your study, but also your study findings and the implications of your the implications of a qualitative study. And so they've taken on the task, or they've taken on the challenge throughout their careers of trying to come up with effective ways of communicating qualitative research. Now I will tell you, when you talk to a qualitative purist, they're not as fond of Creswell and Creswell's work in that they feel that Creswell's work has made qualitative research a little more systematic and not as fluid as qualitative research has been known to be in the past. But over time, Creswell has become a seminal researcher and a seminal author in terms of qualitative and mixed methodology. So we're using the textbook. I think it's just going to be a helpful text, and it is a current text. So you all are positioned to be reading the most current text on the 5 approaches. So there are some questions for consideration, as you're reading through the textbook and as you're reading through this chapter. And some of the things I want you to consider are: what types of research problems are well suited to qualitative research? I don't know if we really think about research in that sense, and that is, what types of research problems, what types of day-to-day experiences that we have, whether it's at work or in terms of your coursework, what types of research problems are well suited for qualitative, and in turn, what research problems are well suited for quantitative, as we're going to delve into that in the latter half of this course. And what disciplinary orientation do you bring to the qualitative research process? And how does that shape what you do, what we do, and how we think about research? Every day, the things that we do, the things that we experience, our own life experiences, impact how we view research. Last semester, when Dr. Onwegbuzi came to speak to students about mixed methods research and the development of literature reviews, one thing he mentioned was that quantitative research is often seen as being very objective and qualitative as being subjective. And he made a great point in that he mentioned that quantitative is also subjective. The topic that we choose to study, the research question that we develop, the way in which we design the study, how we interpret the findings, all of those things, all those aspects of research and quantitative research are impacted by our own life experiences and our own research philosophies. At any time you inject, human or individual beliefs about research, which is what we do throughout the entire research design process, then research itself is not objective. We can try to be as objective as possible, but that goes to the types of decisions that we make in terms of making sure that we minimize our bias and that we account for any possibility of bias impacting the results of our study. And so that goes to the validation and reliability of our study. And so there's a lot of work that was written that has been written about validation and reliability of qualitative research and quantitative research, but more so in terms of mixed methods research by Criswell and by Boozy. And I really suggest that you all try to find those articles and read them, because they are great in terms of discussing the impact of philosophy, which is what chapter 2 of Criswell's book covers. I'll talk about that in a moment. So definitely consider these questions as you read through the Criswell text, and think about how your life experiences have impacted the way in which you not only view research but also conduct research. So qualitative research begins with assumptions and the use of interpretive theoretical frameworks that inform the study of research problems, addressing the meaning of individuals or groups and how they ascribe to a social or human problem. So to study this problem, qualitative researchers use an emerging qualitative approach to inquiry, the collection of data in a natural setting sensitive to the people and places under study. Data analysis that is both inductive and deductive and establishes patterns or themes. And so that's what you do in qualitative research. You're looking for patterns or themes that emerge as a result of your observations and your data collection. The final written report or presentation includes the voices of participants, the reflexivity of the researcher, and a complex description and interpretation of the problem. And so this is hugely important. This is what makes qualitative research very distinct from quantitative research. And it is the human element and how the research is conducted and how it is communicated. And also the contribution to the literature or a call for change. That's what also makes qualitative different from quantitative research. There is a lot of advocacy that happens in qualitative research. And you will see many qualitative researchers take an advocacy stance when they are writing up their findings and in particular their implications for qualitative research. So the selection of the 5 approaches really have to deal with what is best suited for your type of study. And that really begins with your research question. And I know I've said this numerous times whenever I'm talking to students, and that is that the beginning point of your research begins with a research question. And the research question will determine the type of study that you will conduct. If you have a qualitative question, then you go with a qualitative approach. So there are numerous classifications or typologies for qualitative research. And the 5 primary topics or the 5 primary approaches that are going to be covered in the book arose out of authors' personal interests and what happened to be the most common in health, behavioral sciences, and the social sciences, and in education. And so the approaches have, as I mentioned before, a systematic process for inquiry. And so, which is why I think that they also have kind of taken off as being the 5 main approaches. Whenever something is somewhat systematic, it is somewhat easier to wrap your head around. And so I do think that does account for some of the popularity of these 5 approaches in general amongst qualitative researchers. So at the end of the chapter, there are a number of articles that are listed under each qualitative approach. So there are a couple of articles listed under narrative, under phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, case, and as well as case studies. And so I would really suggest that you all take a look at those articles. I know that that's a lot to read, but especially if you know the direction in which you want to move in terms of your own research. It's imperative that you take a look at these articles so that way you get an idea of the type of study that you would like to conduct, the ways in which these researchers have conducted studies. These can serve as exemplars for your own research. Okay, so philosophy. When I took this course in my doctoral program, I was like, oh my gosh, you think about more of the theoretical aspects of philosophy. You think about kind of going from kind of big ideas, but not really getting into the more important aspects of what we do day to day. But I fell in love with the material that I covered in my course because it has a lot to do with how we approach research, and how we frame topics, as well as how we interpret them. So covering philosophy is of huge importance, especially for anyone who's interested in research, because it does impact the way in which we conduct research. So with this chapter, it provides an in-depth discussion about the beliefs and philosophical assumptions that we bring into our research. After discussing why assumptions are important, the chapter talks about ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology. And so if this is not something that we've discussed in any of the research classes to this point, and when Dr. Owig-Bouzy met with us last semester, he asked questions about these 4 areas. And so I thought it was important to really try to cover that this semester, because these 4 areas really comprise what philosophy means to each of us, and how philosophy impacts the way in which we live our own lives, especially the way in which we conduct research in our own lives. And so this Creswell text does a great job of delving into these 4 aspects of philosophy. And so from there, the chapter then covers major paradigms or interpretive frameworks. So post-positivism, social constructivism, transformative frameworks, pragmatism, feminist theories, critical theory, queer theory, disability theories, and social justice interpretive frameworks. And so all of these are hugely important, because these are frameworks that we don't really discuss, but yet play a huge impact in the types of research that you're going to read and that you're going to conduct. And what I really thought was, I guess, refreshing, but also important, was the emphasis on feminist theories, queer theory, and disability theories. And so, we talk a lot about these populations in our day-to-day work as educators, but we don't realize that there are theories that are attached to research, and how research with these populations are conducted. So I thought that this was a good way for you all to learn more about those theories, and to know that there are theories out there that will help you to not only learn more about these populations, but also help you to interpret your data as well, and to help you with your data analysis. And so, in discussing these theories and these frameworks, these are the theoretical, frameworks and the methodological frameworks that you can utilize whenever you're reading an article and you read about the theoretical framework or the methodological framework that guided your study. That's what Creswell is referring to here. So the authors compare each of these frameworks with regard to philosophical assumptions and applying them in practice. And so this is a great exercise in terms of helping you all to understand the way in which you can compare and contrast these theories to help you gain better knowledge about how these theories work in research practice. So what's also important is the situating of philosophy and interpretive frameworks with the research process. So philosophy is an important element in research, as I've mentioned previously, and we consider how to write it into the study. That's what Crystal helps us to do in this chapter. It helps you to understand how you can not only consider it, but also how you can explain and express your philosophical underpinnings within your own research report. So philosophy also means the use of abstract ideas and beliefs that inform research. And philosophy and interpretive frameworks inform qualitative studies within the research process. And so the first phase of this is that the researcher, the first phase of this is the researcher as a multicultural subject. Okay. The second phase of this is the philosophical assumptions and theoretical interpretations. The third phase is research strategies and approaches. The fourth, methods of collection and analysis. And the fifth is the art, practice, and politics of interpretation and evaluation. And so these are the 5 phases that researchers can utilize to both interpret the frameworks that inform the studies that further inform the research process. And so why is philosophy important? Why is this whole thing about philosophy important? Why is understanding your own philosophical underpinnings important in terms of how you conduct research? Well, it affects how we develop and address our research questions. As I mentioned earlier, whether that is with qualitative or with quantitative, our own philosophical beliefs affect how we decide what we study and how we study it. Our training and scholarly communities shape our philosophical assumptions. If you've ever been in a room with folks from different backgrounds in terms of employment backgrounds, you can talk to an engineer and they have a different perspective on how to conduct research from how someone in, let's say, the pure sciences may understand how to conduct research, which is different from how social scientists may understand how to conduct research, which can also be different from what an educator or what an education researcher may deem as important in terms of what to emphasize when conducting research. So our background, our training, and our scholarly communities shape how we understand research. Also, reviewers make philosophical assumptions when evaluating studies. I evaluate journal articles for a journal out of Arizona State University. I also review a number of papers out of AERA, SCRA. And so when I review them, I'm coming from my own philosophical perspective. I don't necessarily do it knowingly, but I know that when I am evaluating a paper, I am hugely, I'm huge when it comes to APA, as you all know. And so for me, that goes to the feasibility of a study. If you were lazy with APA, what else were you lazy about? And so, so for me, I will look into that. And if I see that there are a number of huge mistakes or obvious mistakes that should not have been made, then that is going to somewhat cloud my judgment in terms of how I evaluate the paper overall. So to me, once you get past that hurdle of APA, then I'm able to read through that and say, okay, so now the feasibility is squared away. Let me look at what else they have written here. And so for some of you out there, you may say, what does it have to do with anything? And so again, that is just my own philosophical stance. And so for me, it goes to the detail and care that the researcher took to write the report. And if they took that kind of care and concern with how they wrote the report, then they, in a way, it implies the care and concern that they take in terms of how they conduct research, and the ethical nature and how they conduct research. So that is just my own philosophical stance, and it does impact how I evaluate research. I'm also a pragmatist in terms of how I view research. I'm a mixed methodologist in terms of how I like to conduct research. So those kind of philosophical underpinnings for me do impact the way in which I evaluate research. There are 4 philosophical assumptions primarily. And so those 4 assumptions, which is what I mentioned earlier, the four assumptions that comprise philosophy are ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology. And so the nature of so ontology is the nature of truth, right? So the nature or reality, the nature of reality or truth. And so this is different for each of us, as we're impacted by our lived experiences and predispositions. How I understand my life to be, how I see the world, what I see as my truth may be different from what you see as your truth and how you may view the world. And this is hugely evident in this political climate that we're in, and the ways in which we view the world and how that is starting to converge. And so it's a perfect example of ontology in play here. The next area, or the next assumption that falls under philosophy is epistemology. And so epistemology is how knowledge is known, or how we come to understand what we know, how we acquire knowledge. For instance, I'm a constructionist. So I believe that we co-construct knowledge based on our interaction with others. The next area is axiology. And so axiology is the acknowledgement of values in research. And so what we value is also impacted by our life experiences and how we connect with others. So we not only seek meaning for what we do and what we experience, but we also ascribe meaning as well. And so there's values that we imbue in terms of research. We value a variety of things based on our own lived experiences. And so the value that we place on both the things that we learn and the value that we place on others, that's considered to be axiology. And lastly is methodology. And so you all should know a lot about methodology. We talked about this for the past few semesters. And so methodology is the procedure, the process of qualitative, is the process of research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. So when it comes to writing your philosophical assumptions into qualitative studies, the philosophical assumptions may be included throughout the study in a number of ways. And so one way of doing this is by reporting multiple perspectives as themes. So you can report various kind of philosophical perspectives as themes. And what I mean by that is once you collect data and you analyze that data, especially qualitative research, you will have themes to emerge. And oftentimes, some of those themes that can emerge can be based on philosophical stances. So that's one way in which you can write up philosophical assumptions in qualitative research. Another way is relying on quotes as evidence from participants. So instead of being explicit in how you identify philosophical underpinnings in terms of explicitly understating it as a theme, instead what you can do is you can utilize quotes or quotations from the participants that help to highlight some of the philosophical stances that both the participants may have and that the researcher may have, and that the researcher may have as well. Also discussing openly the values that shape the narrative. And so this happens a lot of times when you do more of a narrative approach, and you just kind of openly discuss some of the values or your own philosophical underpinnings that may impact you as a researcher or that may inform your research. I know that a number of our doctoral students, in terms of those that have recently graduated, they do a narrative aspect of their dissertation. And in that section of the dissertation, they go in depth about their lived experiences and their and the philosophy that has resulted um, um, or that's been impacted by their lived experiences. And so they are very explicit about their philosophical assumptions in the narrative aspect of their dissertation. And then lastly, describing details and particulars before generalizations. So it's really important that that you can really ascribe some detail and some particular aspects or finer points that kind of underscore the philosophical assumptions before you begin to generalize. And so that's another way to kind of that's another way to highlight philosophical assumptions in qualitative studies. And then I've also noticed too that philosophy has been reported as a special section within the paper. In my own dissertation, I have a special section totally dedicated to my own philosophical underpinnings or my own philosophical approach in my dissertation. And so I've seen that done as well. I've seen examples of it. I fell in love with that approach, and so that's what I have done, and that's what I like to do whenever I write. I just put it out there. I mean, everyone has a philosophy, everyone has a philosophical approach, and so I just believe that you just put it out there. To me, it goes to legitimizing your study. It also goes to the ethics of your research and you as a researcher, just by putting it out there, making it explicit. And then, so there are a few interpretive frameworks in terms of philosophical frameworks that you can utilize. And so I mentioned earlier post-positivism, social constructivism, transformative frameworks, postmodern perspectives, pragmatism, feminist theories, critical theory, critical race theory. And so there's also so there are a number of theories that fall under critical theory and critical race theory. There's also culturally responsive teaching and culturally responsive teaching theories that have also become hugely popular as well. And this falls more under social justice. I know that many of you are in social ed, and so those are some theories that would fall that are very much kind of akin to critical theory and critical race theory. Queer theories and disability theories. And so the practice of using social justice interpretive frameworks in qualitative research is huge. And it is why you see a lot of social justice researchers using qualitative research. So this research focuses on understanding specific issues or topics. And the research procedures are sensitive to participants, sites, and power imbalances as well. And so as we know, when we talk about social justice and social justice theories, power imbalances are huge. Self-determination is also a huge aspect of social justice as well. Theories of oppression are also huge in terms of social justice. So researchers are also respectful of co-construction of knowledge with participants as true owners of information. This is really important because this is where I feel quantitative research lacks. And that is that in quantitative research, research participants are seen just as that, participants. They're there to provide data, and you utilize that data and you conduct your study. They're not seen as a part of the research process like qualitative research tries to take ownership of. So in terms of qualitative research, it has really done a great job of involving the participants and not using them for the purposes of data collection only. And that is something that we see happening more and more in quantitative research and less in qualitative research. And that is really respecting the participant as a part of the research process, and understanding that there would be no research if it were not for participants that were willing to play a role or take a part in the research that's being conducted. So there's a dignity aspect that exists in terms of participants that qualitative research really understands and tries to respect, and that quantitative research struggles to do in the same regard. So, so in that sense, qualitative research, it really works well for those that are working in areas of social justice, because you're working with participants, you're working with individuals, human beings that may be in a situation of oppression, or that may be in a situation where there may be injustices taking place. And so to conduct research where you don't recognize that, it's only it can only be more of an insult to the participant. And so there's a recognition there of their humanity in terms of the research process that only will allow you to conduct better research, because you are respecting the individual's contributions to your own research. And so with quantitative researchers, the criticism is that you're supposed to be, separate and apart from your subject, that you are not supposed to be involved with your subjects. And so that's true, but there's a difference between being separate from your subjects and not recognizing the fact that this is that it can be a one-way relationship in terms of how you conduct research. And more participants are becoming weary of participating in research when they feel that it is a one-way street. I've read recently, I need to try to find a couple of those articles. I've read recently where participants care about the so what of the research. They want to know, so then what was the outcome of the research? And they are becoming more and more savvy. So participants are becoming more and more savvy about research. And they do not like being in situations where they feel that they are being used for research purposes. So it's something that, whether you're qualitative or quantitative, you have to become aware of the fact that you have to begin to recognize the humanity in participants. Okay. And so also, research is reported in diverse ways and calls for societal change. This is, again, goes back to using social justice interpretive frameworks in qualitative research. And then lastly, if you look at table 2.2 in chapter 2, it provides a great kind of overview of possible researcher goals, potential researcher influences, an example of researcher practices for each of the interpretive frameworks. Great table. And I would suggest that if you're doing qualitative research, that you put this table in your chapter 3 at the beginning, to kind of outline the 5 approaches and kind of where you stand, or rather what you selected. I think this would be a great table to kind of help the reader understand why you've chosen what you've chosen based on your research parameters. And then lastly, in terms of linking philosophy and interpretive frameworks in qualitative research, for each of the frameworks, we should consider the philosophical assumptions of ontology, epistemology, axiology, and methodology. Okay. So, in every aspect of philosophy, for each of the frameworks, you should consider all 4 of those assumptions. That will help you to have a deeper understanding and a deeper knowledge about each one of those frameworks. Okay. I hope this was helpful to you. I'm out of breath. I hope this was helpful to you. Let me know if you have any questions about the readings. And again, I hope that you enjoy reading this Crest One Pulse book. I'm really excited about using this text for the course. I think it's going to do a lot in the way of helping you all better understand qualitative research and qualitative data analysis. And so, you know, that way when I'm giving you feedback on your chapter 3 and I'm saying, okay, so tell me more about positivism, you know, or tell me more about why you selected this type of qualitative research. What type of qualitative research are you conducting? This textbook does that for you. So, okay, hope you have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the reads. I know that there's a lot of them to read, but do your best to get through them, okay? And I will talk to you soon. Bye.